Time for Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast from the Spacebook for the Fandom Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hadley, Birmingham's king of the geeks, regular host, designated driver, mouth runner, and this time, Arty Farty, here entering the final lap of our coverage of the Time Lord's Diamond anniversary year on our free-speaking, big-thinking show for everyone. Whatever decade or century you started watching, reading or listening along to the adventures of our hero, Doctor Who, we talk about it all on this show with the odd laugh or two thrown in here and there along the way. So come and step into our TARDIS for another great conversation here on Type 40. Yes, and in the 5 years we've been doing this show, Simon, Sarah, Kyle, and myself have been privileged enough to speak to some really, really cool and interesting people. Some of the conversations have gone exactly as I thought. Some not so much, but they've all been really eye-opening and engaging, and the feedback's always been fantastic. Thank you to everybody who gets in touch with us, all part of the fun. Some interviews have even been as if we're talking to old friends that we've only just met. It's the strangest feeling. And when I got to talk to comic book and storyboard artist Christopher Jones a couple of weeks ago, it was very much like that. Christopher is one of the talents who've combined their efforts, their forces, to produce this fabulous new book from Titan Comics to mark the 60th anniversary. And he'll be along in a couple of minutes to tell you all about that, his madcap career and lifelong passion for the greatest TV show of them all, of course, Doctor Who. You're in for a treat, whether you're a comics reader or not. That's right after I remind you that if you'd like to do some real-time traveling of your own, each and every edition of this show, past, present, and future, is just a tap or two away on the device of your choice, but only if you know exactly where to look. A proper time stream chock full of reviews, previews, interviews, geek outs, and deep dives with all our regular panelists and lots more awesome guests. We know there's something for every fan over at type40.podbean.com. More about that a little later on, not before we make contact with the matrix of all knowledge that we call the Fandom Podcast Network for a word about all the other cult conversations going on across all the other shows, covering all those other geeky interests over there. So here we are, get unbagged and unboarded, ready to turn the pages and peruse the panels, all telling the story of when I finally got to meet Christopher Jones. Now, here we are in Doctor Who's Diamond anniversary year, and remembering not just how the series made and makes us feel each time we play a DVD, a Blu-ray, or hit play on Max, BritBox, or iPlay, or anywhere else, but about how it's all been about so much more. An expanded Whoniverse off-screen that's informed and entertained arguably as much, if in more intimate and indescribable ways, I suppose. There've been extra Doctor Who comic strip adventures for almost as long as there's been Doctor Who, since just before the series' first birthday, in fact, way back in November 1964, in the pages of British weekly title TV Comic. The further adventures of the Doctors and the TARDIS have rarely been out of the printed panels since. Notably, of course, within the pages of the official magazine, with that next to unbroken 45-year run. But in recent decades, it's also been the case that the international comic book market has expanded and capitalized on the Time Lord, when first Marvel, then IDW, and now Titan Comics continue to tell new sequential stories to the delight of comic book fans and Doctor Who fans alike. I'm holding the very latest one in my hands right now. This is a sumptuous hardback book here, Once Upon a Time Lord, and I'm genuinely over the moon to say I'm joined by one of the creatives who've made it happen, who've brought it into being. I've got artist, illustrator, educator, and a massive Doctor Who fan, Christopher Jones, with me on Type 40 this time. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I apologize to any listeners who for a moment thought they got to hear from Dan Slott today. It's just me.
Who?
Sorry.
Who?
I can't talk about writing Spider-Man. I'm sorry.
So first things first, Christopher, thanks for making the time to speak to me today.
Oh, my
Once
pleasure.
upon a time, Lords, here we finally have it in our grubby little hands. Tell me about this fabulous book. How did it come about? How did you come to be involved?
Well, the best way to tell this is chronologically, which is ironic for talking about Doctor Who. I had been a fan for ages. I grew up loving Doctor Who. We can talk about that more later if you want. I had started going to Doctor Who conventions as a spinoff of my history of doing comic book conventions and appearing in their artist alley type
Oh yeah,
arrangements. And at one of them, I was putting up my prints that I had done in my table area,
yeah.
and a lot of my prints are based on things that I worked on, but some of them are just things I'm a fan of and wanted to draw.
Mm.
And I had done some Doctor Who art, and I was putting up a piece that I had done that was the Seventh Doctor and Ace in Bessie, since Bessie had appeared in a Seventh Doctor story. Because I had wanted to do the image I wanted that I had in my head that I wanted to share with others was the Doctor driving Bessie, kind of shielding himself with the umbrella, which has taken some hits, and you've got Ace standing up in the back lobbing Nitro 9, which I thought would be great. And of course I needed to make it, like, well, if they're in battle, they need to be fighting someone. Well, let's make it the Daleks. There's the image. So it became this great big thing, and I'm putting it up, and the title, as you can see on the bottom of it, I used the last line spoken in the classic series, "Come on, Ace, we've got work to do." And I'm setting up my table, and a gentleman that I didn't immediately recognize started sitting
Yeah.
up at the table next to me, and he didn't have his stuff up yet, so there's nothing that told me what his name was. And he started looking at my art, and he looked at that one very closely and said, "Oh, I wrote that line."
Really?
And then I realized it was Andrew Cartmel sitting up
Oh
next to me.
wow.
And we got chatting over the weekend, and he was in the process of writing a Seventh Doctor miniseries, and got the idea into his head that he would like me to draw said miniseries. So he made the introduction between myself and Titan Comics, who are the ones that then and still do have the Doctor Who comic license.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, well, just I don't know if it was unfortunate, but the way it turned out is his miniseries was in development for long enough that an entirely different opportunity came along first for me to work on Doctor Who, which was the third Doctor miniseries that Paul Cornell wrote, which was Heralds of Destruction. And that was a whole joyful thing. But I eventually did get to do the seventh Doctor miniseries that Andrew wrote, which was Operation Volcano. And I had done a bunch of covers. So I had accumulated a certain body of Doctor Who work. So to finally get around to answering your question, I had been a fan of Dan Slott's work for a long time and had not ever had a chance to meet him properly. And I was leaving the show floor of New York Comic Con one year, and I saw him sitting at a table just looking through some stuff. I eventually found out that he was basically just waiting for the crowds to thin out
And
before he
Dan
tried to make.
Slott is probably the most notable, or certainly industrious, writer in the history of Amazing Spider-Man from Marvel Comics, isn't he?
I believe he has written more issues of Spider-Man than any other writer. It's like a ridiculous percentage. Like I think he's written a fifth of the run, and given that's a book that goes back just about as long as Doctor Who, that's quite a body of work. But in any case, so I went up to introduce myself, and before I could start to explain further who I was, he said, "Oh, you've drawn Doctor Who. I know who you are." Uh, and so I got to chat with him for a while, and we kind of struck up a friendship that was based on our mutual fandom of Doctor Who, and had talked over the years enough about the things he would love to do if he ever got to write Doctor Who, because he's just a fountain of ideas.
Christopher, it's funny how Doctor Who fans, in whichever walk of life, whichever profession, or geographically wherever we are, I mean, it's easier in the age of the internet, obviously, we just find one another. And the amount of people who tell me similar stories, people who are working in lots of different fields, say, you know what, and you think, oh, well, maybe there was some approach via an agent, it was all very grand, but no, just had a word with that bloke on the next table.
Yeah, pretty much. The issue that Dan had was he was under an exclusive contract with Marvel Comics. He only could write comics for Marvel. And every time his contract came up for renewal, he would ask, could I get an exception put in there that I could just go write a couple of Doctor Who comics? just one Doctor Who comic. Just let me go write a Doctor Who story. I want to write a Doctor Who story. And they were like, no, if you're under exclusive with Marvel, that means you're under exclusive with Marvel. And finally, somehow he wore them down. And this last time that he was renewing his contract, they made a provision that he could write 3 Doctor Who comics. Which
he set Venom on them or something like that.
Yes, and Dan being Dan, of course, took the language of the contract and said, well, I guess that means I get to do 3 Doctor Who graphic novels then. And
it's like that, is it?
And, originally this first one was supposed to come out last year. And I think at some point while it was in the late stages of production, they realized, it's a story prominently featuring the 10th Doctor, and they've just announced that David Tennant is going to be part of the 60th anniversary the following year. Maybe we should delay the release of the book to come out closer to that anniversary.
The word is synergy, isn't it?
I guess
publishing word.
The words I would use were frustrating delay, but that's just me. No, I mean, I'm glad it's finally out. I'm glad fans
Chris,
are finally
it's not just you. It's not just you at all. I've been waiting for this book. I saw the solicitations go out whenever it was, 18 months ago, and I thought, Christopher Jones, Dan Slott, all these people, I've got to read this. Mike Collins. I've spoken to Mike, great guy, fabulous artist again. I've got to see this book. I want to read this strip. But finally, it's here. And I have the synopsis right here too. It says an epic story that sees companion Martha Jones captured by the insatiable pyromeths, heavens above, and her only hope for survival is to keep them distracted with sensational, untold tales of the 10th Doctor facing off against his greatest foes, both classic and new. Witness the incredible adventures of the 10th Doctor like never before. You'll be on the edge of your TARDIS as she recounts 3 unbelievable tales of the Doctor facing off against his deadliest foes. Bursting straight out of the long-running hit TV series, this Doctor Who collection continues the time-travelling tales of the Doctor and friends. And this is my favourite bit. Buy it, read it, then travel back in time to read it for the first time all over again. Whoa, Titan are really selling this, Christopher. Is it really that good? It looks good.
If you travel back in time, you've still read it already. How does traveling back in time help you read it for the first time? I don't understand. It's a
Set
paradox.
Stephen Moffat on them.
Oh, yeah, I tell you. But reading it for the first time, it's a fixed point in time. You can't alter. Never mind. No, yeah, I'm delighted it's finally out. The pyromeths. I got to design visually the pyromeths, our new villain for the story, and I'm delighted with how they look. And I just wish I got to see them in live action, because I think they would be wonderful and horrifying in live action.
Well, Christopher, I don't know if you're aware, but a precedent has now been set, because Beep the Meep, who originally appeared in 1979, is now in the TV series. So it's happened before. It could happen again.
So in 20 or 30 years,
look on the bright side.
We could see the pyromeths appear in a future anniversary special. The design of them. I'm trying to remember how much was in Dan's description of them in the script versus what I came to it with, but the idea was we just kind of wanted these floating eyes and teeth in this black smoky shape, and the kind of skeletal form that you see in the shape of the black smoky body is meant to be a little bit evocative of cave drawings.
Oh, I
It's
get
not
it.
supposed
Yeah.
it's supposed to look sort of, that rough
Yeah.
carved on the wall or painted with a stick dipped in berries kind of
Yeah. It's got that sort of charcoal look
yeah.
to it.
It's meant to be evocative of that so that you could imagine that some of the early cave drawings might have been inspired by the look of these creatures, because they're all about stories told around a campfire at night. So yeah,
Nicely done.
it's a fun thing. I mean, it's, obviously the story structure is Scheherazade. It's 1001 Arabian Nights, and it's I don't know why it has taken someone so long to think to apply that story structure to Doctor Who. It's a marvelous idea, and I think Dan does really fun things with it. So it was a delight to draw the portions I got to draw, and then we had some of the art by Matthew Dow Smith, and then, as you mentioned, Mike Collins contributed a Ninth Doctor story that's part of this volume. So it's a really nice collection of stuff by a lot of by a really great creative team.
Talented people and great storytellers. All
Yeah.
of you. I mean, I love the fact that the companion is Martha as well, because I do feel that she gets the thin end of the wedge. I think a lot of books tend to cover either Rose or Donna, and Martha's always been a personal favourite of mine, and you captured her beautifully there.
Oh, well, thank you very much. The only thing I wish there had been space to do more in the story is I always like it when they get to showcase Martha's medical training, because that
Yeah.
was one of the things that I found exciting about the character when they first introduced her. Not that being a medical doctor puts her on equal footing with being a hundreds of years old Time Lord, but I always like it when companions are presented as having a certain competency, a practical usefulness beyond just being plucky and clever and brave and loyal, which are kind of the standard elements. And yeah, I mean, it was a charming performance and a fun character, and the thing that I feel kind of dragged down a little bit of Martha's arc is I know I'm not the only fan that feels this way, that the whole unrequited romantic interest in the Doctor,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, okay, we get it, let's move on.
Well, Russell feels he's acknowledged that, and I understand he was very apologetic towards Freema personally, because he felt that he kind of wrote the character into a bit of a corner, which is why she left earlier than he'd originally planned, and why he kept bringing her back, because he thought that the character would be better off to be revisited at various junctions. And you can
Yeah,
see now, looking back, can't you, with hindsight.
absolutely. I think one of her best moments is when she decides to leave,
Mm.
and doesn't just leave, but like comes back to explain why she's leaving. And then yeah, when she comes back, she's absolutely delightful, because it's Martha without all that baggage, which is great. Dan definitely had his idea ready to go. The way to finish the epic tale of how I came to this was that once Dan had this in development, then with Titan, when he'd gotten permission from Marvel to do it, uh, I guess they asked him who he wanted to work with, and given our conversations
nice.
in the past about, like, Doctor Who that would be fun to do, uh, he asked for me to be one of the artists involved. So
I want that guy at that convention who did
yeah,
that thing. I want that guy.
exactly. And eventually, after a great deal of detective work, Titan figured out what my name was. And no, in terms of drawing a story, this is my third time around now with Titan on Doctor Who, and hey, as often as they'll give me a chance and I can fit it into my schedule, I'd love to do more, because I love telling stories with Doctor Who. It's so fun.
when you've got an affinity for the characters as well. You can even hear their voices as you're drawing them, or you know how they move, how they look at one another when you're looking at a combination of characters, such as a Doctor and Martha, the Doctor and any companion, come to think of it.
Well, that is certainly an advantage to having everyone involved be, a fan of this show, that there's a lot of it to have soaked in over the years. Because, Dan, I thought, really captured the feel of it with his script. And honestly, I was lucky enough to have this experience with the two previous stories I had done, where you can hear the voice of the characters when you read the words on the page, and then it's just a matter of figuring out, all right, what facial expression, what body language can I portray in the art that sells that moment. I know I can hear the voice in my head. What's the face that goes with that?
Yeah,
voice. And I don't mean which Doctor. I mean,
which
in
idiosyncrasy.
the case of this, like, David Tennant, like, you see a certain smile from him or a certain look, and like, that moment, that the note of performance that's being delivered there, and so you're trying to put that on the page.
They've all got them here and there, haven't they? And it's like members of our own family. I think it's the same actually with a lot of television characters when you spend an extended period of time with them. But there's something particularly about Doctor Who. I think it's possibly because the stories are so rewatchable, or at least we, the fans, spend a lot of our time, so much of our time, watching the same material over and over again. Do you think that's part of it?
I think so. I mean, I've been a fan. So my first exposure to Doctor Who, I'd heard of Doctor Who, but my first chance to watch the show, like so many Americans, was it ran on our local public broadcasting channel, PBS, and public broadcasting system. And they started at the beginning of Tom Baker's run. And I somehow completely perfectly missed all 4 episodes of Robots. So the first episode of Doctor Who I ever saw was episode 1 of Ark in Space, which
not a bad place to start.
Not a bad place to start at all. By the time the Doctor played with a yo-yo for a second and then commented on the artificial gravity of the satellite, I was in love. But so my fandom goes back to that era. I watched it through the remainder of the classic series run. Obviously, we eventually got reruns of the earlier episodes, so I had consumed the whole run of Classic Who. And I think because of its more low budget roots, you invest in those episodes in a slightly different way than something that was more lavishly produced, like either other science fiction or even modern Doctor Who.
We get told that a lot as British fans, particularly when we were younger, growing up in the 80s, when we heard that it had caught on in the States, or it had this sort of cult audience. And people would say, what on earth do they like about it? Because this is the country that makes stuff like Return of the Jedi and all these, at the time, Spielberg was at the height of his powers. We got Indiana Jones and we got Back to the Future, all the emblem stuff. But what on earth do the Americans enjoy about Doctor Who? And now and again, people would say, oh, well, they like the quaint. We used to hear the word quaint a lot. You think, oh, well, fair enough. And sure enough, I do get people mentioning that to me. It's how much fun can we have with £3.50 on the budget is part of the appeal. But I don't think anybody's ever repeated it back to me quite so word for word the way that you just have there.
Well, the thing is, though, I don't say that was part of its appeal. I'm saying that any obvious limitations of the effects, especially when you're watching stuff that isn't just low budget in the moment, but low budget from decades earlier. I mean, I feel the same way watching 1960s Star Trek now. It's like it was really amazing looking for a television show at the time, but it was
showing its age.
Do
you think that it's because they used that money well, and that they, more to the point, that they actually employ their own creative talents really well, very wisely as well, to realize the stuff that's in those scripts, because most of the scripts for particularly classic Doctor Who, I love new Doctor Who as well, but particularly classic Doctor Who, they were ambitious, very, very ambitious over 4 or 6 parts. And I know that a lot of them were sort of pared down, but even so, they tasked themselves with doing the very, very best they could. And so they feel, you sort of will them to success, don't you? And I think that when a television show makes us feel like that, we feel it's on us to kind of bring the balance from our own imaginations.
Well, that's the point I was trying to make. Is I think the thing that really made the show work it didn't work because of those limitations. It worked in spite of them, and what made it work was the writing and the performances. And yes, some amazingly talented people did the best they could with the resources at hand, and sometimes they pulled stuff off that you're like, how did this show manage that? Wow. But really, I think the thing that makes you fall in love with classic Doctor Who is the character, the imaginative stories, and the charismatic performances by the recurring cast, or the guest cast, but I do think that as an audience, you end up investing in that in a different way, because you're having to bridge those gaps, in such that I grew up loving behind the scenes stuff on TV shows and movies. I love knowing how stuff was made. I love behind the scenes features, all that. And I still remember the first time I ever saw a photo of the console room set that was pulled back far enough that you could see the edges of the set and the cameras and the studio lights and everything. And I was sort of like, oh, it's not that I thought it was real, but it's sort of,
but even
there's
so,
something a little sad about seeing the illusion, destroyed.
Just 2.5 feet away.
It stops.
Is a ladder.
It's not a 360-degree set. It's not any of that. It's just pretty much what they built, what you absolutely needed to fill the screen, and not a foot more.
Or filmed in such confined spaces as well, at BBC Lime Grove originally, then BBC Television Centre.
Yes.
That was about the limit of it. Whatever was the size of, not even their biggest studios, was the area that they got to play with more often than not. Of course, we've got the fabulous locations too. They went out to various clay pits and things like that people always talk about and joke about. But that definitely adds to the appeal as well. The same with Blake 7 and lots of other British shows.
By the way, all the American Doctor Who fans I know, everybody who saw an Adventure in Space and Time loved it. And I can't imagine to a British audience that the BBC and its history is that much more of an institution than even the Anglophiles in America would consider it to be. Like, what an amazing program.
Because it's evocative and obviously speaks of times past, simpler times, and even more so when you see the birth of something that we've all come to love and obsess over in the time in between.
Absolutely, and I think there were the hardcore fans like myself who already knew a lot of that history because we'd sought it out, and we had heard the oral history passed along by going to conventions and things, as far as that time in the series and the creation of the Daleks and William Hartnell's health issues that led to him being gently pushed out, which led to regeneration and all of that stuff. But a lot of more casual viewers, had no idea. They'd never heard any of that before. So having that story told in such a evocative and moving way was really wonderful.
So you're currently storyboarding at the moment, but you've done a hell of a lot of comics work, haven't you? Sequential work for the companies that people know, even non-comics fans know who DC and Marvel are, but you've also worked for Image and Malibu and Titan and various other smaller labels too, haven't you? You've really run the gamut with the comic books.
Yeah, I mean, some of my credits are very, oh, they did a reprint of this, so I guess technically I've done work for that company. But yeah, I've worked for quite a few over the years, and it never gets old getting to work on characters that you grew up being a childhood fan of. I mean, aside from the sense of, feeling like you get to play with the cool toys in the toy box, um, it there's also this very deep satisfaction that you feel like you're giving something back, that
Mm.
you're the wheel turns, and now I'm creating comics that young readers are going to react to. It's the strangest thing. I will see a stack of my comics, and I will see a stack of comics that I had nothing to do with, and the ones that I did because I know how the sausage was made, to use that
Yes.
expression. It feels less real to me somehow. It feels like, well, those are the
Yeah.
comics I did. And it always is just sort of a mind blowing experience when I will go to conventions and meet fans, and I get reminded. You're finding all kinds of fun covers that I did over the years. Um, I'll meet fans that have found those comics and have reacted to them the same way, I reacted to the comics that were coming out when I was young, and that's very rewarding and exciting and kind of humbling. So
The characters that I associate you with the most as a fan of yours, because I genuinely, I love your work. I've been reading your
oh,
stuff for years.
thank you.
The characters that I associate you most with are the DC team Young Justice, which
Yep.
have a very popular animated show, don't they? That's on Netflix at the moment, but it's run off and on for 10 years or so, hasn't it? So a lot of people have caught that show, but it's very dynamic. The characters are so well rounded, and the way that you bring them to the page too, you make it just enough like the cartoon, but I can tell you have your own fun with it as well,
Yeah. Well,
keeping
man,
it on model.
my history with Young Justice is possibly more convoluted than my history with Doctor Who. But the short version is, when I heard that my friend Greg Weisman was doing a new animated show with DC superheroes. I was not yet involved with the animation industry at all, but I thought, oh, I know how this works. There'll be a comic book tie-in for it. So I tried to find out who the editor was going to be and see if I could, get in early to try to get that
Schmooze your
job.
way in.
And by the time I just identified who the editor was, I was told that the creative team was already in place. I was like, oh well. And they showed they put out the first two episodes, which is like a two-part pilot
Yeah.
movie kind of the series, a while before the regular weekly episodes started coming out. And those first two came out, and I'm like, oh, this show is fantastic. Oh, now I really wish I'd gotten to work on this. So I was genuinely, objectively a big fan of it before I had anything to do with it. And then I heard from DC that the first artist that had originally been put on the book was leaving to go do a different project, and would I be interested in coming on board and taking their place? And I was like, yes. So I was the regular artist on the tie-in comic book for the duration of the show's original 2-season run on Cartoon Network. And then every time there's been more comics since then, I've gotten to do those, and
You've
for
been
the long
drafted. You've been
and
drafted back in.
and for the longest time, I would go to conventions, and people would, bless their hearts, think I created Young Justice, or think that I worked directly on the show. And while I was very proud of the comic work I had done, I did not want to be taking credit for something I actually didn't do. So I'd have to do all this clarifying. It's like, no, I worked on this. I didn't work on this. And then when it came back the most recent time for season 4, Young Justice Phantoms,
Mm.
um, I was at a place career-wise. I was looking to make some changes, and the opportunity presented itself to basically apply to be a part of that production, and I got the job. And that was what led to my moving out here to Los Angeles and starting to do work for Warner Brothers Animation. So I actually did get to work on the show for season 4. And then the most recent comic was Young Justice Targets, which we did after season 4 concluded, and that felt like a little almost a comics victory lap. It was sort of like, oh, and now I get to do one more run of these comics, having actually had the experience of working on the TV show. And we're still, fingers crossed that we'll at some point get to do more comics or television episodes. The industry is weird. It could still happen, but it's been a long wait to find out.
Well, Futurama's just come back yet again, so anything's possible, isn't it?
Well,
Young Justice is a fabulous, fabulous show, and your name is synonymous with it.
Well, that's very kind, and I feel like my association with it is a little disproportionate just because of the comics and the number of conventions that I do, and being active on social media. It is, believe me, the production of the show, it's not like it was Greg Weisman and Brandon Vietti, the 2 producers, and then me. I would have been somewhere like about, 30,
I get it,
30 names down at least.
But it strikes me that you do enjoy working with teams, with groups of more than one character. I know you've done some Spider-Man work and some Batman work too on the Batman, tying into the Batman animated series, the Batman Strikes. But when I look at your Young Justice covers, the stuff, your Avengers stuff, there's lots of characters doing lots of things, sort of either in fights or interacting with one another. And it seems to me that you relish that. The more heroes and villains, the better. Just throw them all together and have a lot of fun. Like all the toys are coming out of the toy box. That's the impression that I get whenever I see your work. And that's why I was excited to see you associated with the Doctor Who brand.
Oh, wow. That's an interesting connection. Well, thank you. I mean, so much of your career when you do this kind of stuff is based on, what opportunities are made available to you. I don't know that I've sought out stuff with a big ensemble cast versus more, solo protagonist kind of stuff any more than I ever sought out, a large. It's funny, in comics, a lot of people associate me with animation tie-in stuff because I've done a lot of that. And that's only because that's kind of how I got my foot in the door at DC Comics back in the day. And then once you get known for doing a certain kind of thing,
if you can keep your characters consistent and on model with the brand, as the viewers and readers will be used to seeing it in other media. If you're that guy who can hold that line and still bring it to life, I've done similar work for DC Thompson in Britain on characters for a comic called the Beano over the years. I've worked on a lot of stuff myself, and so I know that's what they look for. If you can take those things and not bring much of your own flair to it, just enough to make it come alive, but make it look on model and on brand. I've also worked for Warner Brothers myself. I did a lot of licensed stuff with Bugs Bunny, Tasmania, all that stuff. Yeah, so I know exactly what you mean with the style guides.
Well, it's interesting. Like, fans will compliment you, saying, "Oh, I love your style," and I'm like,
that's their style.
Style exactly are we talking about? Because depending on the project, that's a totally different style.
I have to tell you, the one time I had the same picture of Yosemite Sam come back at least 15 times because the mustache wasn't quite right.
Oh my goodness. That is the trick, is that you want to be on model, as they say, but you don't want it to be just this sort of lifeless, rote reproduction of whatever reference material they've given you for what on model means. So you're trying to find a way to bring your storytelling skills to the page, your sense of composition, to give it some energy, have it be, fun and visually appealing, but doing that all within the framework of looking like this established visual style, which is an interesting challenge. But the thing I was going to say is, I never set out to specialize in doing that sort of thing. It's just you get known for doing that, and that's what people tend to offer you. And then there's this whole other side of my comics career where I've done stuff based on live action things where there are actor likenesses involved. I think the first one of those I did was a story based on an American TV show from the 70s, Kolchak the Night Stalker.
I know it.
Um,
Darren McGavin.
Yeah, exactly. And then I got to do a 2-part story for the Batman 66 comics. That's the 1960s Adam West Batman. That was a ton of fun. And now all this Doctor Who work. And it's funny to me that despite this body of work that I feel is fairly photorealistic and detailed and all, whatever you want to say about it, and yet editors at DC and Marvel still I hear from them if they need something drawn based on a TV cartoon.
We talk a lot on this show about how Doctor Who fans are more often than not very, very creative people, either professionally or as a hobby, as something that they do in their spare time to relax away from the day job or away from the family. We do find that Doctor Who does reach creative people and inspire in the same way that Star Trek does, I think, with the scientifically minded. I know that there are creative Star Trek fans, don't get me wrong, and there are scientifically minded Doctor Who fans, but generally speaking, I think that's kind of the difference. So I was wondering, so watching classic Doctor Who while you were growing up, watching it on PBS, did you draw Doctor Who characters in your childhood? Did you scribble them down? Did Doctor Who sort of inform, and other TV shows, did it all go in part to setting you on that creative career path?
I didn't see a lot of Doctor Who comics when I was younger. I was aware that they existed, but you just didn't see a lot of them in the wild, as it were, as an American, at least where I was living.
You had to really want to read them to be able to go and find them, as I understand. That's how it's explained to me.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I might have doodled the occasional police box or Dalek or something. I know I at least once did a portrait of the Fourth Doctor, but most of my random scribblings were more superhero stuff. But, as far as what you were saying about the audience being creative, I mean, I think so much of Doctor Who stories are defined by being very idea intensive. The fact that it's not about, it's not a crime show or like a superhero thing is like, who your heroes are, and they'll fight different villains every month, but there's
the black hat and the white hat, and it's not procedural particularly.
There's still a certain formula to those things, and Doctor Who is sort of like, well, you've got your box and your main characters, and we drop them into a completely different scenario every story, and you don't know if it's going to be serious or funny or the past or the future or what, and you get these, was it Moffat that said that writing Doctor Who is basically burning a perfectly good feature film idea every week?
Yes, it is. Yeah.
And like I think that's always been true. I think so many Doctor Who stories may get executed a certain way because it's Doctor Who.
Russell T Davies has said too that Doctor Who is the show that eats story, eats it up.
Yeah. You've got art on the screen right now from my Seventh Doctor story. And,
Operation Volcano, isn't it?
Yes. And my big ambition with that one is I love Sylvester McCoy's Seventh Doctor. I love Sophie Aldred as Ace. I love that era of the show. But to me, that is an era where you can really feel the constraints of the budget. Every part of this script, I was like, how do I make this feel epic? How do I do this and make it feel like a Bond film?
Well, I think picking up on something you said earlier on, the amount of your work that I've seen and that I've read, and just speaking to you now over the last half an hour or so, I think what strikes me is that you're looking at this show and these characters and this world, the Whoniverse, and you're thinking, just like when you saw that behind the scenes photo, how can I make Doctor Who 360? That is how I think you relate to it, just from how little I've only met you today, but that's what I'm picking up on.
Well, I mean, certainly, to me, if you're going to take something that was a television show and do it as a comic, you want to give the audience the experience of, oh, this feels like the show I know, these feel like the characters I know, but let's optimize the story we're telling for the medium we're telling it in. And comics don't have to be constrained by the size of the studio or the special effects budget or any of that. The example that when I talk about the Seventh Doctor era feeling a little constrained by the budget, the example I go to is I adore the story The Happiness Patrol.
Oh, yes.
But can you imagine how different that story would feel if they could have gone out and done location shooting so that it felt like you were in a city as opposed to, a couple of set piece corners and
flats in television sets. Yeah, because the original script, it was meant to be, the Happiness Patrol was meant to take place literally in one evening, one night, in one city after dark. And Graham Curry, the writer, that's how he imagined it, and that's what he angled for. But unfortunately, when it came to breaking it down by the producer John Nathan Turner, that was the story that had to all be filmed in the studio. That's how it was broken down then.
Yeah, and so as I said, I got this script from Andrew Cartmel that had these elements that felt very big and ambitious. I mean, aliens have a secret base hidden in a volcano. Talk about feeling like a Bond film.
Yeah.
But really everything. It's like the moment we went to something that didn't have a defined size or shape to it. My thought was, how do we blow this up to the largest scale and make it feel visually impressive? Even some of the action. There's a moment in the story where the Doctor has been tinkering with his umbrella in an earlier scene, and when they go to finally confront these aliens, the script has him turn around and just shoot gas out of the tip of his umbrella at one of them and takes them down that way.
Now that sounds very Batman 66. That sounds very
like
Burgess Meredith.
He borrowed one of the Penguin's umbrellas, absolutely. But I was just sort of like, oh, the Doctor doesn't have a lot of action in this last sequence. I'm trying to make him feel more adventurous and active. So I had him like spin around and gas like 6 people.
Love it
when he did this move, just because why not? It just
absolutely
it makes it feel like he's accomplishing more.
There's something about that impish little man in the Panama hat with the umbrella that really appeals to you. That incarnation particularly chimes with you. Is it because he's such an animated actor as well, Sylvester? Because not all of the Doctors are they?
People find out you're a Doctor Who fan, and the first thing they want to know is who your favorite Doctor is. And I honestly don't have one. My brain doesn't pick favorites.
No, I don't either.
My brain doesn't tend to do favorites. I mean, I don't have a favorite color. I don't have a favorite food. I like different things about different things. It's an apples and oranges comparison. But the thing I like specifically about the Seventh Doctor, aside from just the way he was written and performed, was sort of intriguing. But I've always been a little fascinated by Sylvester McCoy because he was hired to play one kind of Doctor. They were getting pressure from the BBC to make the show funnier. And they hired this guy with a background doing light comedy. And you watch his first season of stories, and he's just goofy and the malaprops and all of that. And then they do this pivot to he is the darkest, most Machiavellian, sinister undertones. It's like,
yeah,
how? And he pulls it off.
He does, doesn't he?
And to me, it was a bit of a throwback to, if you look at Patrick Troughton, who was very not imposing a figure, but you never were sure how much the clowning was.
You could almost have a reasonable, relatively down-to-earth conversation with the Second Doctor.
Yes. And the other thing I love about Sylvester McCoy is I've had the privilege of either in-person meeting or being part of a large audience watching interviews
Yes.
with many of the doctors, and I have to say, Sylvester is the one that if you meet Sylvester McCoy, you feel like you've met the Seventh Doctor.
I don't think there's no off switch to Sylvester McCoy. I think he's permanently on and permanently the Doctor, and his Doctor is wrapped up in whoever he is. He's for such a little man, he's a very particular kind of character. I think he's always performing and loves what he does.
Yes. I think there's a long tradition now of actors being cast as the Doctor and being asked to bring a lot of their own personality to the performance. But certainly in the case of Sylvester, it just seems like, all right, pretend you're a Time Lord. And he's like, right, pretend I'm a Time Lord. Sure, fine. He's marvelous. They're all marvelous.
They're all marvelous in their own ways, aren't they? But there's a certain kind of actor. I think that Sylvester and Tom, I think they're actually quite similar actors. They're just a few feet apart in height.
A few feet, yes.
It's other than that, I think they're both kind of. You would never meet people like that. People always say about Tom Baker that when you watch him, he can't even walk through a door in a naturalistic way. And I think Sylvester's very much the same. Sylvester McCoy is the Doctor, and the Doctor is Sylvester McCoy.
More than once, I have been at a convention where I knew he was going to be in attendance and would see him across, a hotel lobby, and between what his normal clothes are like, and he's always got the hat, and he is the silhouette of his own Doctor in normal attire. Absolutely.
I understand you're quite involved in the convention circuit too, aren't you? Don't you organise conventions, run conventions? There's lots of photos of you here and there. Here you are with a couple of friends, come to think of it, a couple of wrong uns.
Aha! Oh, goodness, I had forgotten that photo. That's wonderful. I believe I am pointing at my own smile, both because I don't want the Happiness Patrol to take me out, and also because I am beyond delighted to be photographed with the Happiness Patrol, complete with the Candyman, who I know is a divisive figure in Doctor Who fandom.
Yeah, I love the Candyman.
I adore the Candyman.
Yes.
So as far as organizing conventions, it's really limited to one. I helped start, and I don't mean like I started. I was part of a team that helped start a general science fiction convention back in Minnesota called Convergence, that is held on July 4th weekend, and going on. Well, the first one was in 1999, so do the math. It's been held every year except we missed a year due to COVID. I do not help run it anymore, although I still am involved with it. I do a lot of artwork for it. I help run.
One of the godfathers of conversions.
Yes. And that has certainly given me a very a great deal of empathy for, as I go and attend other conventions, whether it be as a guest or in their artist alley, or just showing up as a fan of the things that the convention organizers have to deal with. You get into the issues of traffic management and trying to just keep all the different participants happy with their own various wants and needs, and it's a lot of work, and I really appreciate what the good convention organizers deal with.
When I look back to your comics work with Doctor Who, it's Operation Volcano and Heralds of Destruction, when I was reading them for the first time, it did strike me as here is someone, and I know obviously this was Paul Cornell who wrote Heralds of Destruction, and we talked about Dan Slott and other writers, Andrew Cartmel, of course. All writers. I mean, Paul Cornell is just a fabulous writer, isn't he?
Yes.
Both his Doctor Who literary work, the comic book stuff. The guy seems to be able to write everything to an annoyingly high standard. But looking at your artwork, I could tell here is a man who is relishing capturing Roger Delgado pulling off a rubber mask. All those moments.
While you have that image on screen, let me just say, of all the things I got to draw on that first miniseries with the Third Doctor, the one little detail that I was like, why do I take such delight in this moment? I don't know. Every time I found myself inking Roger Delgado's beard, and specifically the little stripes of
Yes.
gray at
Got
the
it.
corners, I was just like, I'm drawing Roger Delgado as the Master in Doctor Who. This is
Does
so
life
cool.
get any better than this, Christopher?
Oh, so good. And the thing a quick story about that comic. I had known Paul Cornell for a few years. We'd had him as a guest at Convergence since that came up. I'd been friends with him for a while. The introductions had been made to Titan Comics through Andrew Cartmel. I get an email from Titan Comics saying, would you be interested in drawing a Third Doctor miniseries? And I said, absolutely. And they said, okay, we have a writer connected to it that if we get you on this project, we'll obviously tell you who it is, but we can't say it until you're confirmed to be a part of it, because it's going to be kind of a big deal when we announce that they're writing Doctor Who for us. And they had me do a couple sample pages just to get everyone signed off on that they'd be happy with the look of my drawing Doctor Who, because this was my first Doctor Who comics work. So I penciled 2 pages, and they said, good news, everybody loves your stuff. Let's do this. And I said, I sent them back an email saying, you still haven't told me who the writer is. I'm really dying to know. And before I hear back from Titan Comics, I get an email from Paul Cornell that just says, Jehoshaphat. And apparently they hadn't told him what artists they were reaching out to. So even though we'd already known each other, it was news to us that we were being partnered together to work on this book, which ended up just being a delight. And my favorite thing about his scripts were that it was a 5-issue miniseries, and issue 1, I thought, felt like it could have been a lost episode of the series.
It's exhilarating. The entire thing is beautifully written, beautifully illustrated, and a joy to read.
But that first issue, there's a alien invasion of a group of about 4 or 5 aliens in a small village in the English countryside, and unit responds, and the Doctor and Joe show up in Bessie, and they dispatch it and head back to unit headquarters. I'm like, this is an episode of the show.
Yeah.
By the time you get to issue 5 of that miniseries, it has gone to crazy town. It is this ridiculous, bizarre, epic thing that
upscaled,
they wouldn't have done on the television show in a million years. And I just like that we got to, again, taking advantage of it being a comic book and not a television show, got to start from a place that was very familiar, and then kind of take you by the hand and go someplace that the Third Doctor had not been before in a visual story.
Not that I want to give Paul a big head or anything, but this is what I enjoy about his writing. It's the way that he does upscale things, and there's so much shape to the things that he writes as well. Everything makes sense. It's thematically too. His characters are always so consistent, always really interesting, and it made for fabulous reading. I can't recommend either series enough, to be honest.
The fact that that Third Doctor miniseries is both just an entertaining adventure, but he actually forms it into character development for the Doctor as far as his decision to start leaving Earth and traveling time and space more regularly again, because it falls in that gap between, it's after the 3 Doctors. He's gotten the use of the TARDIS back, but he still is kind of hanging around with the unit and
still got his own decisions to
make.
Just
have to. Yeah. And it's just, it's a great story, and I
because
really love drawing it.
he respects and sort of loves the Brigadier. He'd never admit that, but he does, and he certainly does Joe. And so, yeah, when you're watching those stories, obviously back in the day, at 70s and tea time TV for 8 to 12-year-olds, you can't necessarily bog the stories, the scripts down with that kind of thing, almost sort of soul searching. But you can do that on the printed page decades later to a dedicated audience of people who can hear the voices of those characters in their heads and recognize all those little nuances and quips and ticks that you were talking about illustrating earlier on.
Well, I think it's interesting, and I know volumes have been said and written about this, how during the so-called wilderness years that Doctor Who existed as novels and things, but not as a television show, that the nature of the medium of it being a novel meant that the stories tended to delve more into characterization and internal thoughts and feelings and all of that over just adventure plot, which I think really had a lasting impact as you started to see the Big Finish audios, and then eventually the return of the television show, that you do explore the inner workings, the emotional side of these characters more than the classic series tended to. Although, to be fair to the classic series, I think if you look at the last run of stories with the Seventh Doctor and Ace, Sylvester, they were already starting to head a little bit in that direction.
They were pointing the way, weren't they? Definitely.
So it's a fascinating series. People talk about how different modern Doctor Who is from classic Doctor Who, and I feel like the show has just been evolving since 1963. I don't know that Christopher Eccleston Doctor Who is more different from Sylvester McCoy Doctor Who than Sylvester was from William Hartnell. I mean, it's just we didn't get to see all the intermediate steps there for a while.
Yeah, that's a cool way of looking at it as well. As somebody then who's become sort of partly known for your connection to Doctor Who, as well as everything else, when you're at conventions, when you're a guest and you're doing your thing in Artists Alley, obviously people can come up, can't they? And they can ask you to sign their comic book covers or interior art, or they may have purchased some of your original art and they want you to sign that, or just have their photo taken with you dressed as somebody out of Young Justice or as Batman or as Spider-Man or anybody. You have all of that kind of thing. But I would imagine that word has got out that you're a bit of a Doctor Who fan. And if you can find those connections with people such as Dan Slott and Andrew Cartmel there on adjoining tables, the members of the public, the punters, they know you're a Doctor Who fan too. So when they come up and ask for an on-the-spot commission, do any of them ask for Doctor Who characters? And if they do your eyes just light up when you
well, your question stems from the premise that that's a fairly rare occurrence. I was just at New York Comic Con a month ago, and then not long ago I went back to Minnesota for an event called Twin Cities Con, and at both of those I had Doctor Who fans coming up to me and wanting Doctor Who artwork and with Doctor Who comics to sign. It's not that unusual.
Not unusual. What have you got a set character that people ask you to draw? Or do they come up and say, give me Peter Capaldi looking out at a starry sky with the TARDIS in the background? Or do they say, you just do what you want? Do they say, look, whatever you think, just let the inspiration take you and fill that blank cover with whatever you may?
I occasionally have people asking for me to do whatever inspires me. More often they have their own idea of what they want. Yeah. And if someone really, really, really wants me to come up with something myself, I certainly will. But sometimes people seem to think that they're offering that to me like it's some kind of treat. I'm like, this is your art to take home. I would rather give you what is going to make you
give you pleasure. Yeah.
Then you're making me draw Peter Davison. I drew Peter Davison 2 weeks ago. It's like, no. I love all of it. The one thing I struggle with is that I find doing likenesses of actors a little more challenging and time consuming. It's not as forgiving as, someone comes up to me and asks me to draw the Joker. I'm like, oh, great, because there's a lot of leeway in how that could come out, and people are still like, oh yeah, that's the Joker, fine, sure. But you're trying to capture the likeness of, Katie Manning, and it's like, oh, if I don't get the eyes just right, it's not going to look like her. So I sometimes debate like, oh man, do they need to charge more?
Well, I think anybody who was in any doubt of your credentials as a Doctor Who fan after an hour already in your company will now be within no doubt whatsoever that you are a massive Doctor Who fan, and
Oh, absolutely.
clearly versed in the classic show and the new show too. So I was wondering, have you got a specific combination of characters? You've done the unit family there with Pertwee and the Brig and Katie. And you've also done the Seventh Doctor and Ace. Have you got a dream Doctor companion combination that you'd love to revisit in sequential art form?
Oh boy.
Or is that giving the game away? Is that if you
No.
speak it out loud, it'll never happen? Is it one of those things?
Well, I mean, the way you say it, I mean, it's not like I wouldn't be happy to go back and do more of the ones I've already done.
Yeah, I know.
Let me say it this way to be a non-story spoiler. I've drawn Patrick Troughton, but I would enjoy doing a proper second Doctor story.
Mm.
Something with Jamie and getting to draw his era's console room and all of that, which I got to do for one wonderful panel. By the way, in this new book that Dan Slott wrote, of my contributions to the whole thing, the thing that was probably the most fun was this wonderful double page spread that is all of the first 10 Doctors in their respective TARDIS control rooms, which was a bear to draw, but really fun and satisfying to do. You're talking about my being my bona fides as a Doctor Who fan. I will share this story with you. I was at a convention once, and a child with his parents, the child being like maybe 8, I don't know, comes up to my table and is looking at stuff on the table, including my Doctor Who prints, and it was clear that this kid liked Doctor Who, which I'm always happy to find a child that's into Doctor Who, and he seems to know his stuff, and I think this was after the show had come back in 2005, but it would have been around that time. And I said to this kid, do you know all the actors who have played the Doctor? And he looks at me like, can you ask me something a little more challenging than that? And I'm like, all right, fine. Do you know the name of the actor that played the first Doctor in the 20th anniversary special, The Five Doctors? And this 8-year-old kid looks at me and says, Richard Herndl. And I'm like, you win. Here, take a free print. Pick one. It's yours. It's free. You win. I all hail the next generation of Doctor Who fandom.
Fabulous moment. Obviously, this is the diamond anniversary of Doctor Who. Right now, it's all happening now. As of time of recording, we're about to be whisked away on 3 brand new adventures, with the 14th Doctor reunited with companion Donna Noble, played by David Tennant and Catherine Tate. That's about to hit the screen any day now. In fact, you've probably got some of it by the time we publish this episode. So on a scale of 1 to 10, Chris, how much are you looking forward to seeing where the Doctor's going to go next? Not just the 14th Doctor, but the 15th Doctor too, because he's on the way in the not too distant future as well. They're spoiling us, aren't they? It's all happening.
I hadn't heard about any of this. No, no, I'm very, very excited. I'm going to find it very strange to like many Americans be turning to Disney Plus to watch Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It's very strange, but hey, I am delighted. I'm delighted that the show is continuing. I am excited to see what Russell T Davies brings to it. I don't expect him to be turning the clock back to 2005.
No.
It's going to be fascinating after we see some of his new run of Doctor Who to play that compare contrast game of, all right, what's the through line of familiar elements that RTD coming back brought back to the show versus what's different about his approach this time than what it was then. Oh, it's going to be so great. And it's going to be really great to have another chapter in the story of the Doctor and Donna Noble. I'm really looking forward to Ncuti Gatwa coming in. I'm scale of 1 to 10. Was that the question? 15, obviously 15.
It has to be 15. There's so much left to see. They keep showing us, well, actually, they don't keep showing us. It's other fans that keep taking pictures and putting them up on X and on Facebook and all that kind of thing where they're out filming it. So we know they've filmed so much more than we've seen at the moment. But it is coming. It is coming sooner rather than later. I think in 6 months' time, we'll know.
Before the show came back in 2005, I had discussions with friends about how, the ideal way for it to come back, and Rose hit all the notes. It's like, let's meet the companion, let's have them meet the Doctor, so we get their experience of encountering this strange and mysterious figure, shades of Unearthly Child all over again. We don't see the inside of the TARDIS until they see the inside of the TARDIS. All of that. There's a lot I love about the Paul McGann TV movie. The two biggest things are Paul McGann and the TARDIS set. But if the hope was to bring on board a new generation of fans, it's like, okay, so we're going to start with this confusing thing about this villain who's being put on trial by voices of something we don't see, and then we're in this box, except it's a big room and it's being narrated by our main character, but it's a different actor narrating than the main character we're seeing, and then he turns into the guy that was narrating. Like that's not
it's how all over the map.
That's not how you introduce a new audience to this. So yeah, I'm very excited.
You know what else I'm excited about, Chris?
What's that?
I'm excited about Doctor Who Once Upon a Time from Titan Comics. I've got my copy. I hope you get yours out there. So this is by Eisner Award-winning Spider-Man writer Dan Slott, making his long-awaited, by the sounds of it, Doctor Who debut. The art is by Matthew Dow-Smith, Mike Collins, and Christopher Jones here. And there's 3 stories running in there with the Doctor and Martha and all manner of other characters to discover when you get this into your life. Now, there's 2 covers to choose from, I understand.
Yes, the one by myself, which is the very busy one on the left there, and the cover on the right.
Levine, there's everything in there.
Marvelous Adam Hughes. So
of course it is. I recognize his style now. Yeah.
That was, I believe, that was Dan calling in a favor. And the biggest silver lining of the book being delayed is, yes, I don't know if Titan had any plans for doing variant covers initially on this. The Adam Hughes cover was going to be the cover, and then because it was delayed for so long, Titan decided that they wanted some new cover art for the resolicitation when they were offering it for sale again. So that's how my cover came about. And so I was delighted that I got to do my own cover for it, and we get both. So fans can get either or both, whatever they want. And I'm a happy camper for having gotten to work on it.
For the people out there who like to collect them all, there's also a couple of photographic covers with the stories divided into 2 standard comic books. So not in the double size hardback edition. You can get them as 2 floppies too, with these photographic covers with the Doctor and Martha and Rose and the Doctor there on them. So that's a nice touch as well for the people who might want something they can bag and board a little bit easier than a hardback.
And who doesn't love a good floppy?
Yeah, well, say no more, my friend. Say no more. Yeah, so this is Doctor Who Once Upon a Time Lord from Titan Comics. It's available now to order or to gift to someone, to the Doctor Who fan in your life, or just the comic book fan in your life. Give them a thrill ride there of adventures in time and space with a couple of doctors and companions. Your earlier work is also still available, still in print, isn't it, Christopher? So we've got Heralds of Destruction and Operation Volcano. They're both available as trade paperbacks, aren't they?
Yes, they are. By all means, check with your local comic shop, but they're also available from online booksellers. It's been a while, so some places might not have them, but they're around. You can get them with a little searching.
Available from all reputable and a few disreputable stockists.
There you go.
As they say. Yeah, well, I can't thank you enough for coming on, for spending the time to talk to me about this, Christopher, because obviously this is a big deal. It's Doctor Who's anniversary, and this is really the comic book contribution. Doctor Who has always been in comic book form, more or less, as I said right at the top of the show. To me, it's only right there be something special in comic strip form to mark this diamond anniversary. I'm so glad that you guys could pull it out of the bag, even if there was a bit of fudging of the dates there, to bring it into line. So we did get something to chime with the 60th anniversary event.
Well, all the fans that I've heard from have been great about it. Thank you for allowing this American to be part of the big Doctor Who party. I am not coming to it as a poser. I can
tell that.
I have loved this show since I first encountered it, and I am absolutely thrilled to get to be a part of it now.
Fabulous stuff. Well, yeah, happy Doctor Who 60th anniversary to you as well, Chris. We'd love to get you back on at some point, because I think we've barely scratched the surface of your Doctor Who fandom and your knowledge. I'd love to get your takes on some other things. So what would you say? Do you want to rematerialize at some point in the future?
Just let me know when. I'll be back.
Okay, good stuff. That's legally binding, everybody. Legally binding. Doctor Who Once Upon a Time Lord. Yes, that's available now. And thank you again, Chris, for your company. It's been a blast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blood of Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our fandom flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast, with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek, and The Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
Yes, we've teased and tantalized you there, and we can even clothe you too. There's merch to match all of those shows, including Type 40. If you head over to tpublic.com, search for the Fandom Podcast Network, and that's where you'll find a store full of all the team colours for all of the shows, on everything from t-shirts and phone cases and mugs, right the way up to enormous tapestries. Treat yourself, treat your other selves. All goes to support the Fandom Podcast Network into the bargain too, so everybody wins. And our thanks again to Christopher Jones there, Titan Comics, Doctor Who Once Upon a Time Lord, the first of 3 planned hardback specials by writer Dan Slott and all his collaborators. That's available right now. Oh, and that's the old girl starting up calling time on another episode of Type 48 Doctor Who podcast. Another one's on the way soon, though, of course. Look out for that wherever you found this. Maybe it was on the dedicated home feed for Type 40, type40.podbean.com. We could have rolled up on the podcatcher of your choice. Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Google, all those places. It would be a lot easier for me to tell you the places that you couldn't find Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast. We're also on YouTube, the world's largest streaming platform with extended, exclusive video editions of every single podcast now. Subscribe to Type 40 on YouTube and Rumble. You even get extra Type 40s too there, as well as our sister show, Type 40 Live, that weekly live stream magazine show. Completely raw, completely live, where anything can happen, anything can be said, and often is. Get all of that over on the Type 40 YouTube channel too. We're still on the fabulous Fandom Podcast Network's own master feed. Of course we are, loaded up with all those treats for your ears. Never mind on the weekly. It's coming at you practically on the daily. Please consider a trip sideways in time for more quality shows from the FPN. Could be you'd like to have your say on all of this. You can do just that when you reach out to us through our social media, Instagram and X at Type40 Doctor Who, or you can email us type40doctorwho@gmail.com. And if you're feeling really brave and fancy some real-time, extra-dimensional chit-chat, you can find us, all of us, over there in the Type 40 Facebook group, along with regenerations worth upon regenerations worth of other fans from the classic era, from the new era, and all of us, I think, anticipating all new Doctor Who to come. Again, you can find Christopher Jones on social media. Reach out to me if you dare on X and Instagram as the Spacebook, where I'm wheezing and groaning, ranting and raving about all things geeky inside and outside of the TARDIS, in TV, movies, comic books, and whatever else catches my eye, my imagination, or both. That's it for another edition of Type 40. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. As ever, we always have the time if you have the space here at Type 40. For now, though, I'll just wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for 2024. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.